Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Straw Greenhorn. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When the branch is yet tender and put it forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So ye likewise, when ye shall see these things, know that it is nigh, even at the door. Verily I say unto you, that this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall never pass away. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no not the angels in heaven, not the Son, but the Father only. So here we're still dealing with some of the signs of the end times, before, all things shall be settled. We know that God, He has a plan in everything that He does. He has procedure and protocol, and for everything that has happened and everything that is happening, He has a remedy. There's a thing that's done. To address each thing that's wrong and that's out of place. Each thing being wrong that is out of place, causes certain signs. A lot of these things that we see is just due to these, principalities, rules of darkness of this, world and its spiritual wickedness in high places. The decisions that they're making and the things that they're doing, on a day-to-day basis, it's triggering all these things. And, God, He's just letting us know so that we're not caught, surprised, when He was in the Garden of Gethsemane with them. He said, watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The flesh being weak would see these things and it would turn back. It would lose hope and feel overwhelmed, even, saying things like, well, there's no way that God can be real if these things are happening. They'll pull back, and the things that will happen, it won't be so good, right? But so these things are done to let us know beforehand, so that when we see them, we know that it's He that told us. Because I can just envision certain people seeing this and turning back, losing hope, losing faith. But that's why He said that he that endured to the end, the same shall be saved. This is an enduring, this is an overcoming. We know that He is God and He is in control of all things. But it's due to the nature of God giving us really, free will, the choice to choose. Certain things have to play out. We each have to choose and we have to stand by our decision. There'll be some that abandon their decision, right? So really these things, the Bible does say that all things which were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. I mean that these things they are written for us to understand, for us to, observe, progress along the timeline, understanding that, the Bible says that in the last days that the love of many, shall wax cold, that men shall be lovers of themselves more than the things of God. And with men's heart waxing cold, we see these things. We see, wars. Where's the love? Where's the love for your fellow mankind? Where's their consideration for you to want to invade where they live? Destroy all their monuments, destroy their buildings. It really, all these people that get lost in death, doing all these things. Where's your where's your consideration? Famines. Certain parts of the world have enough food. They said to feed the entire world for 7 years straight. But yet, so we have people going without food. The love of many wax cold, men seeking power and riches for themselves, just to climb and just climb and climb and climb high. As I say this, I'm visioning the Tower of Babel. That's when, in the early days when, right after Adam and Eve, when the men got together and said, let us build a tower unto heaven. Now ask me where they are going, I don't know. You build that high enough, they're gonna run out of oxygen, right? But it's the same thing that's happening. Men are building, to ascend up to the highest heavens, and they're building themselves. They're trying to increase in wealth, they're trying to increase in power and influence. Ultimately, every man wants to rule the world. And some man they're relentless as to what they will go through in pursuit of this. So here are the consequences. We've been dealing with a whole chapter full so far, Mark 13 of consequences. Like I said, this started out with them noticing the beautiful temple and the buildings and the stones that made it. Jesus said, there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And they started asking for signs. He gave them, wars, rumors of wars, false Christ arising, being put out of the synagogue, being beaten, being brought before kings and great rulers for my sake, brother betraying the brother unto death, the father the son, children rising up against their parents, causing them to be put to death. He that is in Judea, let him flee to the mountains. He that is on the housetop, do not even go into the house. He that is in the field, do not return to the house, not even for your garment. Pray that your flight be not in the winter, nor in the Sabbath. He that endured to the end, shall be saved. So, we add these, right now. He's using the parable of the fig tree. And you can understand why he was so angry when he cursed it. Because how does it start out? Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When her branches get tender and put it forth leaves. So it's the leaves that indicate that, something is going on. Because remember, when he came to the fig tree, he saw there nothing but leaves and he cursed it. Because, you were expecting, seeing the leaves, you were expecting that the figs, should already be on there. So, I did a whole video on that. Speaking of, trying to convince people that you're something that you're not. Because this, fig tree was putting forth leaves for whatever reason, and it wasn't, the time of figs. It wasn't even the time of figs. So where are you going with all these leaves? Trying to convince people that you're something that you're not, trying to, manipulate. You know what I mean? Just be authentic, be who you are, be where you're at. I know we get, a great, pride of self-esteem and even social status by, being advanced in certain things. But, to lie to get these things, I mean, you're just setting yourself up for failure. This tree got cursed and it never grew anything again. It withered away. So learn the parable of the fig tree. When the branches get tender and put it forth leaves, you know that summer, that it is nigh even at the door. So, based on the observation of certain things, when it's time for certain things to, happen, you will see certain things that indicate and point, you know, he even did say, look out for false Christ that shall come and show many great signs and wonders. If you understand with everything that happens, there's signs to observe. God, he even gave a parable about the sky, that when you know that the sky is, I believe it was red, then, it should be fall weather. But if the sky is red and lowering, then it should be, a different kind of weather. I'm really paraphrasing and cutting this parable up. But even by observing the sky, you can tell how the weather will be. In those days, they really did. I don't know if they had a weatherman, but they had ways in order to predict, even the weather itself. So, using this fig tree, but he often, loves using the fig tree as an example. He has used it more than any other tree. Not the sycamore tree, not the cedars of Lebanon. It's always the fig tree. So, in this one, so we see, this fig tree being tender and branches tender, put it forth leaves. So, the branch being tender, it means that it's time for something to happen. The leaves showing up, means that a change has taken place. So now, I can imagine there's many things that would signal to this tree that it's time to move forward to the next phase. If you understand, even with a fruit that's put forth, when it's not ready, it's really hardened, right? It's really hardened and, tough. If you bite into it, it's going to be sour more than likely. But, even that fruit has a process to mature. Fruits, even when you remove them from the branch, they can still reach full maturity, which means that at a certain time, enough is in, the fruit itself for it to complete maturity without being needed, more resources from the branch or from, which really are carrying things from the root, water, nutrients, minerals. We know that it's the leaves really that, do photosynthesis. So there would be a way to relay things made in the leaves, carrying it to this fruit. So I imagine that, there's certain things in the atmosphere. Because if you look, I mean, at the soil, when the seasons change, what is a change in soil? We know that, lightning, it fixes nitrogen to make nitrates, which is really the proteins. Your beans and legumes, these, pea plants that really give you a lot of protein. So a change in temperature is really something, the greatest indicator I could imagine that would signal to this plant, this tree, that it's time for something to change. I mean, if you were to look at the soil itself, what really changes? So, I mean, there are signals, that signal that, if certain things are happening. If you look at certain animals that migrate, how do they know that it's time to, certain animals, they fly towards the warmer, places, like they fly south, away from winter cold and snow and ice. But, what's signaling, these, birds? I imagine the first thing would be, like changing the weather. They could see, things happening, things, changing. But then, a lot of these things that they're programmed. It's like us and our, it's called the circadian rhythm. That's where you get jet lag because, according to where you lived, that that you woke up at a certain time, you went to bed at a certain time, you stayed awake for a certain amount of hours, and then you went to bed. Now, when you travel like across many time zones, remember this, pattern is really a pattern that's there. So now you cross all these time zones, and where it would have been night where you were, it's still day. I know you can feel it that even though it's broad day, like you need to go to bed, you need to sleep, get some rest. So I imagine that there's a circadian rhythm built in, in some of these animals where they know that after a certain time, they have to travel and go to the head towards a warmer place because it's about to turn cold. And imagine, is it possible for even plants, like this fig tree? Like I said, to change the temperature is the main thing. But then, a circadian rhythm, even within them, that they know that after X amount of months, then it's gonna come our season. And then this is gonna last for a certain amount of months, and then it's gonna be over. And we gotta go in hibernation, or we gotta go in rest, where everything gets green, the branch gets hardened, and the leaves they go. So imagine this fig tree having a circadian rhythm where it knows that it just spent the X amount of months and weeks in hiding. It's time to come out. The weather, the temperature also helping. I know like in Jamaica where I'm from, it's always warm, and this still happens. That certain months of the year you'll get certain fruits, but then they'll go away. Even though it's still warm, so you gotta know it's gotta be something deeper than temperature. Temperature might assist and let you know, but there's something going on. God is in control. When Job, after he lost everything and he was sitting there with his three friends and they were going back and forth arguing. I forget who was it. No, it was when God showed up at the end and he was asking Job questions. Just to show him his greatness and his majesty and him being God. He if you look at the questions, you will see that he was asking him these things, but you know that Job, he was a man after God's own heart, and God loved Job so much. So he was just kind of like, I would say throwing his weight around with Job, and he was asking him questions like, "Can you guide Arcturus and Pleiades?" And he listed all these stars in heaven. Can you, feed the young lions when they do hunger? When the lion roareth in the jungle and there's no prey, and he was listing all these things, and I'm drawing upon that right now saying if it's God Himself that leads these stars to where they should go. I'm talking about all these constellations that we've named. Even the ones that we've named after the zodiac signs. Sagittarius, Capricorn, Virgo, Gemini. These things, these stars, these group of stars. He said, these and a bunch of things. This was communicating that He, is the one that's leading these things. Is God an active participant in this world, in His earth? Is He an active participant in nature? When Jesus was saying, "O ye of little faith, consider the lilies of the field. They spin not, they toil not." But I tell you that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of this. Then what did it say? If God so clothed the grass which is here today and tomorrow is cast into the furnace, how much more shall He clothe you, O ye of little faith? The Bible speaks of God clothing even the grass. Who's telling these animals when to migrate? Who's telling this fig tree that it's time to forth, these branches? Jesus saw this fig tree and it wasn't even the time for figs. Who told it that it could, put forth these things? So then, if we can hear and we can disobey, I'm just putting it out there. What if this fig tree was actually disobeying? What if this was, listening to another voice? I mean, it was cursed to the point of being, withered away, gone forever. So learn the parable of the fig tree. When the branches get tender and put it forth leaves, you know that that summer is nigh. That it is. So there's a combination of things happening here. Like I said, the circadian rhythm, that's the built-in time, that even we have when we know it's time to sleep, time to wake up. The change in temperature, and even the humidity, that will change in the atmosphere during the, the shift of the seasons. And here we have, God's voice. I mean, I know it's not something we can measure, like, how you would be in a like a musician in a studio recording and you see all those things that measure the sound, how they move up and down. I know we can't measure his voice like that, but he's an active participant. And that's why we give glory to God, because, there's certain things that happen that we can't explain. There's no way we can explain how these things are maintained, how they are kept, how they, cycle around and nothing spins out of cycle. So you know that summer is nigh. So you likewise, when you shall see these things, know that it is nigh, even at the door. So even as you looking for the fig tree bringing forth these leaves, you can tell that it is nigh. It's the same thing. I see right here, it's possible to find strength, borrowing strength from something else. It's possible to find direction, borrowing direction from something else. I mean, I just told a parable. Consider the lilies of the field, they spin not, they toil not, but God clotheth you. So what is that? As much confidence as they have in God, you should be having even more, because you're worth more than they. Find the confidence in God by observing, the lily of the field. So these signs that I'm telling you, and I just listed them. The brother putting brother to death, the father, the son, children rising up against their parents. If you turn on, daytime TV, you see too many of these things happening, especially on those court TV shows. The father suing the son, the mother suing the daughter, mother suing the son, the father suing the daughter. How many people we see are arrested for killing their parents? False Christs arising everywhere, showing great signs and wonders. You being arrested for what you believe, being brought before great men for testimony unto them. So when you see these signs that I've told you, know that it is nigh at the door. And what is nigh? This hope that we have in us. If we follow the timeline, from the Garden of Eden, we know, that man, he was created in perfection. Then, the woman was given unto him. They were given instructions. Touch any tree except this one. Really no commandments were given. This was the only thing that we saw them, be given as a warning. The heart of men was good. We know that God, why did He destroy the earth with the flood? Bible says that He, looked upon the hearts of men continually. I saw all day and all night that it was evil and nothing but evil, evil and evil continually. Adam and Eve in this garden before they, touched that fruit. I mean, they had the heart of God. They, they were naked and they were not ashamed because they were clothed. I've heard too many preachers say that they were clothed with His, glory. They were clothed with his glory, and that was enough. The end is nigh, at the door, the final judgment. This is where we get that final separation of the wheat from the tares, where we get that final separation of who gets to walk in eternity with God versus who gets sent somewhere else. This is really a sign for those that believe, because if you don't believe, then you just go back and forth with whatever trend the world is happening with right now. Right now the LGBTQ is really on the rise. These musicians performing all these rituals at their concerts. People paying homage to the devil so openly. If you're not, a follower of Jesus Christ and looking for these signs, I know that maybe the Muslims, they might be the only one that might believe in a judgment. I know the rest, they're just seeking, finding the deeper self, transcending their physical bodies to walk in, I don't know, I don't know. But if you speak to them, you'll get the idea that they don't really believe that there'll be a judgment. There'll be purposeful, gathering for each man to be weighed. And that's the thing. When, the king of Babylon, when he took vessels from the house of the Lord, the pots, plates, the cups, and stuff, and he began to eat from them, using them as his cutlery. And then the hand on the hand on the wall appeared and started writing, saying, thou art weighed in the balance and thou art found wanting. I see too many people, if I could take a side moment just to speak, the judgment, I see too many people, trying to get by what they believe and not what they do. Knowing, believing, and doing is, I found it to be two different things. Knowing without doing, it would be like buying a brand new Lamborghini and just having it sit in your driveway and never driving it. How would that look? Knowing but never doing. What are the things that the Lord he called us to do? Well, he said, by these signs you shall know them that believe, right? Lay hands on the sick, they recover. Praying for people, evangelizing, casting out devils. The others, like speaking with tongues. If any serpent bite you, you don't die. If you drink, even if you eat poison, you'd make it out. I call these ones the more passive ones, because you're not going to go around looking for serpents to bite you, right? Or looking to eat poison. This is just a covering that if you fall under any, malicious intent, God, he's got you. Jesus, he was always big on giving to the poor. That disciple when I came onto him. And, this is one of the this is where I see people fail the most, is the poor and needy. When that disciple came onto him, the rich young one, saying, Master, good master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, why callest thou me good? There's none good but God. Thou knowest the commandments. Thou shalt not kill, steal, bear false witness, commit adultery, honor thy mother and father, do not defraud, do not lie, all these things. Then he said, Lord, I've kept all these things even from I was a youth. Then the Bible said Jesus beheld him, loved him. But you see, while loving him, Jesus, he searched himself. And, he came up with the ultimate question. All right, so you say you believe me all the way. And, this should really be a sign as to what, he really is looking for. I mean, you can't go wrong with this sign. You see, if you were to focus more of your time on this, I believe you'd get by so easy. He said, one thing thou lackest, go and sell all that thou hast and give to the poor, and then thou shalt have treasure in heaven. He never said, go and speak with new tongues. He never said, go and cast out devils or lay hands on the sick and let them recover. But the poor and needy. Because, we can always, participate in that. Because it seems as if, the laying hands on the sick, the casting out devils, you have to be like active and a leader. You have to be a real active participant in the church itself. But then giving to the poor, we can always do that. There's always something that we have that we can share. I've observed people that say that they believe. They believe everything, but except this. I really see it because they're poor. They don't have anything and they're nobody. They don't have anything and they're nobody. And people can take them or leave them. Even Judas, when that lady came and broke the expensive box of oil perfume on Jesus, he complained. Why wasn't this sold for much and given to the poor? Because he observed the heart of Jesus, saw just how much this meant to him and how. Because, the people that he was preaching to and healing, I guarantee you, right? I've seen, people that, they'll do everything, they'll do all these things, but then, when it comes to the poor and needy, they hesitate. They come up with all these reasons that it completely contradicts everything they believe in. They'll be going along so well, but then when it comes to this, they fall so short. So when you see all these things, therefore likewise, know that it is in a night, even at the door. I was saying that I see people, they go by what they believe and not what they do. It's like they hold, these teachings and these doctrine in their head. But then when it's time to vomit it out, let me say vomit. When it's time to vomit it out in real life, I don't know, there's a blockage. And I can only reason it is either that they don't know what it means or they don't know how to do it. That's one of the things it could be. You learn all these rules, you learn all these things, and you try to keep yourself clean. You walk around so careful not to fall. You walk around, because you know the consequence if you do. You end up becoming so guarded. I've also seen where people that lose their humanity. It's like, I don't know, learning this doctrine, learning all these rules and these statutes. I've seen so many people lose their humanity. They become like calculating, so cold. Jesus, he gave a parable about, publican, and it was a Pharisee that went up in the temple to pray. That the Pharisee prayed, Lord, I thank you that I am not like, this sinner man right here. I tithe, I pay tithe, I give, all these things. I fast during the week 3 times. And he listed all these things. But then the sinner man, he said, Lord, he didn't even look up to heaven. He smote his chest and said, Lord, merciful to me, a sinner. Jesus said that it was this man that went down and not this Pharisee, that had all these rules in his head, all these check boxes that he's checking, while losing his humanity. I mean, can you look on somebody that's poor and needy and see their need? And can you see them as a person? Can you feel their hunger? Can you feel their hunger? Can you feel, their thirst? Can you feel the fact that they haven't showered in weeks? Can you feel the dirty clothes that they're wearing? Can you feel the cold ground that they have to sleep on? Do these things mean anything to you? Every time before he fed the multitude with the fishes and the loaves, what did it say? He looked upon the multitude and he had compassion on them. That's the first thing he did. Just, know that, well, it's dinner time. It's dinner time and we should. He didn't say that. He had compassion. It was his compassion that led him, to feed them. Because you see, during that moment of compassion, he started following them. He was actually mentally tracing them. Because what did he say? He said, I have compassion on the multitude, for they have been with me now 3 days and have not eaten anything. So, he's putting himself in their shoes. And like I said, he's following them. All right, so if I was, them, being in their shoes, being with me for 3 days. All right, so the first thing I see is that I haven't eaten. The next thing, did they get enough rest? Have they been sleeping? I'm sure they need, a place to, maybe go, number one or number two to the bathroom. It was only 3 days, so most of these other things, it wasn't time for them to really become in jeopardy. He put himself in their shoes. If I send them away, they shall faint in the way, because many of them came from so far. It was nothing but compassion. It's a real, challenge, I say, to balance, holiness with compassion. Because oftentimes in my observation, I see holiness, taking, place compassion. It's almost like you can't carry both. You gotta choose one. You can't go wrong with taking care of the poor and needy. Are you able to? Is it a big deal? Do you feel offended if you have to bless, one of them with like maybe, $50, taking them somewhere and just paying for an entire meal, a lavish meal, for them somewhere? I remember being corner store once, and there was this guy out there. I asked him, is he hungry? I took him inside, and when he came in, that the boys behind the counter, they were so offended at him being in there, telling him to get out. How many times we're gonna tell you don't come in here? I said, no, this is my guest. I'm buying something for him. I'm buying his lunch. I paid and I left. I left him with the receipts, so in case they tried to say anything. But even in that, I realized what some of them face on a day-to-day basis. And I've seen people get it caught up where they don't think that doing for them it means anything. And if you observe them deep enough, you'll see it. Doing for these people, it doesn't mean anything, in God's eyes. You might as well just be throwing your money away. And I think that's exactly what's going on, what they think, what they believe. If I do this, I'm just going to be throwing my money away. It's, I don't know. I'm pretty sure I can find something else to do with this money. Even if I was to go and give it to, I don't know, or do something with it. So when you shall see these things, know that it is nigh, even at the door. For verily I say unto you, that this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. This generation, what is he talking about? Is he talking about, the generation that you are in right now? You'll be in your father's son. This generation, what's the time period? What's the definition? If you notice, if you remember when he was, Jesus, when he was here, the scribes and Pharisees, they came unto him asking him of a sign. What did he say? He said, this evil and adulterous generation, seek it for a sign. But no sign shall be given except the sign of Jonah the prophet. I believe that this generation, it speaks of, everything since we lost our place in the Garden of Eden. Because, I get that from the sense of when the Sadducees came unto him asking, the parable of the 7 brothers, they each took the same wife. The first one, he died, leave it to the second. He died, leaving her to the third, all the way up to number 7. Whose wife shall she be in the resurrection? Jesus said that in the resurrection, when they shall rise, they are no longer given in marriage, nor are they married, but are as the angels in heaven. So this generation, it ends when we become like the angels in heaven. This generation shall not pass till all these things, be fulfilled, which is basically saying that we shall not move on to the next phase until these things are completed. But these things are written and they must come to pass. And you know what I say? These things are not predictions, they're observations. Remember, God, He lives in all periods of time, all at the same time. He lives in the past, God is still in the past. In those mistakes that you made, all those things you did, God is right there, still looking at them. And He's in the present with you right now, walking. And He's also walking in the future, waiting for you to get there. So, we don't get to go on to the next phase until we complete, all these things. And, it's not, like I say, it's not check boxes, but it's just observations. That these things will happen. They are just the things that, will be going on. So before we come like the angels, all these things, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall never pass away. If we understand that the word of God, is built, giving us guarantees. If we start with a really broad guarantee, is that we won't just vaporize into dust. We won't just disappear and vaporize into dust. It's actually the word of God that's keeping us here alive and breathing. Because, it is appointed unto men once to die. God, He has your appointed date, and you don't go anywhere until then. He has appointed unto each man a measure of grace, a measure of faith. It is God's word that's keeping justice. It's God's word that's keeping peace. Because, Lucifer, this devil, he arose, tried to take over, that didn't work out. So what is he doing now? He is just running around trying to destroy everything. Ultimately what he would want is to just be able to wipe out this entire creation. So if you understand what's going on, is that while he is going on in this, God, He has a certain standard. He has a different, expectation. He has a different, background that He has set in motion. Whatsoever you sow, you shall reap. That's the first thing. This devil, he doesn't understand that this also applies to him. He's running around doing all these things. Whatsoever you sow, you shall reap. That's the first thing. Bible says he who keeps, his mind stayed on Him, He shall keep him in perfect peace. What are the promise of God? I never leave you nor forsake you. I'm there with you always, even in destruction. I will deliver you. As long as the earth remaineth, there shall be seed time and harvest. I stand at the door knocking. You open up unto me. I come in unto you and sup with you with me. The word of God, the promises of God, heaven and earth shall pass away. But this frame that I have set, that no man can run in here and do anything more than I allow him to do. The devil, he tries to do enough destruction all over the place so that it looks like, he has taken control out of God's hands. When God, He just permits certain things to happen for people to understand, for people to learn. A terrible question was asked in the beginning, before us, when there were only the angels in heaven. Because, God, they worshipped Him. They did, what He was building. Let's call it that. What He was building, they were carrying out these things. But then, there arose a question. A question was arisen. Is God unjust? Is He pig-headed? Is He controlling? Is He just wanting to control us and tell us what to do? Is He making us serve Him? This is a question that was asked. 1/3 fell. Because, look, all we do is what He tells us. We don't know anything else. So this question, it remains out there. So, God, He's letting these things play out. Because, how many of the 2/3 angels that stayed with Him, still had, lingering doubt? Yeah, we stay with God, right? But how many of them had, questions in their heart that they were afraid to ask? They were afraid to even voice. So now He's letting all these things play out. Lucifer, that came and said all these things. Look what he's doing. Right now he's got, Russia inside Ukraine. Look at what they're doing. Look at what, Hitler, did to Poland. Look at the famine that's around the world. Have I ever let you guys go hungry? Lucifer, he arose and he's saying all these things. But look at what he's doing. Know the difference between me and him. Because, I have life set up to be one way. And look what he's presenting. Little children getting molested. That's his plan. That's his freedom. Women that get raped, men that get raped, people that get murdered, people that get defrauded. They work their whole life and they had their money saving somewhere only to find out that it was all a scam. Can you imagine following this Lucifer, this devil, and then looking at him starve like a whole village, a whole country, and then showing up laughing, showing up saying, success, victory. Look at these people. They're so skinny. All you can see is can literally see the outline of their bones. Imagine following him and then seeing that. What would you have to say? So heaven and earth will pass away, before my word does. Because there is order. That's what the devil he's trying to communicate disorder when God is just allowing him to do certain things. Because the ones that followed you, it's going to be so heartbreaking for them to see who they followed. Yeah, I know they're stuck doing evil, but don't tell me that they don't observe what's going on. Gang wars, people doing drugs, families being torn apart, the divorce in marriages, the kids being caught in the middle. Devil, this is what you meant. This is what you meant then, a better kingdom than what, the Most High was proposing, what he was having us build. This is what you meant. Because a question was asked that day, And you can see because this devil is such a liar. You think he told any of them that first of all, when he took them, what did he feed them with? What were you guys eating? It's God that rained manna from heaven. Physical food, food itself. What were you guys eating? But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, not the angels in heaven, not the Son, but the Father only. When the disciples asked him, I forget what they asked him. I think it was after he was risen. And he answered them saying, it is not for you to know, the times and seasons which the Father has put in his power. I believe they were asking him when he shall return. Because like I said, God, he lives even in the future. So he knows the day. He has seen it. He has observed it. He's probably living there right now, walking around in it. I heard one speaker say that, it's because of the great love that, Jesus. Well, we can understand why the angels don't know, right? But why not even the Son knows? He said that it's because the great love that Jesus had, that he would have let it slip. At some point, he would have told them. There's hardly anything that he did not tell them. When the lady with the daughter is not meet to take the children's bread cast to little dogs, she said, "For truth, Lord. But even the little dogs eat from the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Jesus said, "For this saying, go that way." He gave her what she wanted, even though the first thing was a no. His love, would he not have let it slip out at some point? Only the Father knows. I am Straw Greenhorn.